Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. It's so good to be here. My name is Shai Ganu. Some of you know I'm not really shy, and I promise that's the first time we've used that joke. No, it's not. On behalf of WTW, we're really honored to be a partner of Steward Leadership 25, and it's great to be back for this really important conversation. I was chatting with Rajiv last night, and it's very refreshing that we don't have an all-male panel, or manels as they're called. So I'm assuming I'm the token diversity member of today's panel. But instead, we are very fortunate to have a stellar group of leaders. We have Ms. Khim, the global lead of Lifebuoy at Unilever, Ms. Sandra Suppa, head of corporate communications at Faber-Castell, and Ms. Lucita Jasmin, the director for sustainability and external affairs at April Group. Welcome, ladies. Thank you. Before we get started, we all acknowledge that for sustainability agenda to be truly embedded as a core part of business priorities, companies must move past the compliance focus, must move past the moral imperative, and truly start to appreciate the business benefits, the financial and non-financial business benefits that come from a sustainability strategy. As we heard earlier today, companies must do good, do well, do right, or as we heard from Dylan, focus on risk, reward, and resilience. So in this context, very fortunate to hear from senior business leaders from Asia on their practical experiences of making sustainability work. So it's not just talk, it's actually action as well. So perhaps we can get started, and Khim, I'll come to you first. Lifebuoy and Unilever are doing very meaningful work and are championing the do good, do well, do right ethos. Could you please share your experience on integrating sustainability priorities as a core part of your business at Lifebuoy?
Yeah. So it's an interesting question because I think Lifebuoy, unlike many other brands, is actually a brand that's born out of purpose.
Indeed.
So we were founded in 1894 by William Lever, and it was actually a brand founded during the cholera outbreak in Victoria, England. And it was therefore a product and a brand that was produced and created to actually save lives and protect families during the outbreak. And this has actually been embedded and been the DNA of the brand since that day till now, and will probably go on in the future. And I think just because of embedding this purpose of saving lives and helping families fall ill a little less often into the core, it becomes something that we do actually with every single part of the marketing mix or every single part of our day-to-day to make the impact. So everything from the product that is more efficacious when it comes to germ protection to things like the communications and the campaign, so that we ensure that we bring out the message to keep hygiene commonplace and bring this hygiene education, especially to kids around the world, because they then bring the information back home to their families. Or even things like our pricing and accessibility, because we are an affordable and accessible brand, so that we make hygiene commonplace. We allow people to be able to buy the products in an accessible manner. So how do we ensure that we always keep our pricing affordable so that we are able to serve the underserved communities? Or how can we ensure that our distribution is widespread so that we become accessible even in rural areas? And therefore, this is the impact that we make on a day-to-day. Even with partnerships, I think we believe a lot in the value of partnerships, because it is partnerships with NGOs and government that enable us to make an impact at a much, much bigger scale. Yeah, so that's how we sort of do our sustainability at the heart of the brand.
Fantastic. So hygiene commonplace, but again, appreciating both the commercial benefits as well as the social benefits that come from that.
Exactly.
Brilliant. Great way to get us started. Thank you. Sandra, if I may come to you next. At Faber-Castell, you are literally and figuratively sowing seeds for the future. And what I mean by that, we've read about your decision to invest in forestry few generations ago, I think 3 generations ago, and you're realizing the gains now. So in your experience, do family businesses have advantages over listed companies? Being able to take a long-term view, does that make them better stewards?
Well, let me briefly explain maybe
Indeed.
the forestry project to all of you. So Faber-Castell is the world's leading pencil and pen manufacturer in the world. We produce around 2 billion color pencils and black pencils per year. Now, in the 1980s, we started an afforestation project in the Brazilian Cerrado. And We actually grow our own trees there. It's a sustainable project, FSC certified, and but it comes with a variety of environmental projects, a large biodiversity project as well. It's a Caribbean a Caribbean pine tree, but although it is fast growing, it still takes 20 years until you can harvest and replant again. So the question is talking about shareholders. Would you be willing to wait for 20 years until you get a return on investment? So the question is, a CEO taking this type of decision needs the full trust and commitment of the shareholders to be able to take such decisions. And I was talking to Brad Sanders yesterday from April, and we both agreed that it is favorable to have a family member backing the board and backing, let's say, the operational leadership team in this type of decisions. So I'm grateful we have that. And to come back to your question, I don't think they are the better stewards. I think they have maybe the better prerequisites to become one.
What wonderfully said. Not necessarily better stewards, but better prerequisites. And you're touching on a theme that we feel very passionately about at WW, which is you can't just impose sensibilities or governance models from, let's say, Anglo-Saxon jurisdictions to this part of the world. One of the very unique characteristics of this part of the world is the ownership structures of our companies, where we have a disproportionately large number of our companies that have a controlling shareholder. And in that case, having some sort of a family connection actually is beneficial for companies. So thank you for sharing that. Lucita, if we may come to you next. April Group, you've pioneered sustainable forestry practices since 1995, the year I was born, by the way. No, it's not. Not waiting for government or regulatory mandates, you've set yourselves ambitious carbon emission reduction goals. So could you please explain your journey so far and what have been some of the highlights and challenges?
Thanks, Shai. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be, with you all today. Just for a quick introduction, our company is one of the largest producers of fiber-based products, April Group. By fiber-based, we mean pulp, paper, viscose for clothing, paperboard for packaging, all 100% plantation wood. We've adopted a no deforestation commitment since 2015 for our plantation operations in Indonesia. And this is, of course, part of a broader sustainable forest management policy that has independent oversight and independent assurance. On our climate strategy, or carbon emissions reduction in 2020, we adopted our April 2030 sustainability agenda, which has 4 commitment pillars and 18 targets across climate, nature, people, and sustainable growth. Under the climate positive pillars, some of the targets are net zero emissions from land use, a 25% reduction in product emissions intensity, and also increasing the share of renewables in our energy mix by up to 90% in our manufacturing operations and up to 50% in our forestry operations. But I guess, given all these targets, what I would like to emphasize is that you cannot set climate ambitions in isolation. You need to adopt an integrated approach, which is why our April 2030 agenda has all those 4 pillars. I think we all need to recognize as a global community that we are facing the twin crisis of climate and nature. And there's evidence that says that the risk of a species extinction actually increases with every degree of warming. So we can see the interdependencies across these different pillars of commitments. At the same time, we also recognize the development imperative. We have about 120 million people in ASEAN that still live below the poverty line. And in Indonesia, that number is about 26 million. So that would be about 4 times the population of Singapore. So seeing all these imperatives together and coming up with an approach in terms of your climate ambitions is really quite important. In terms of our target setting, how did we recognize these interdependencies? For us to achieve our net zero emissions from land use target, we needed to adopt a target, or we need to meet this other target that says we need to increase productivity from our existing plantations by 50%, which means no matter how we grow our production capacity and our fiber supply requirement, we're not going to need to open up any new forests to convert them into plantations. And then another interdependent target is that for us to meet also net zero, we needed to invest in nature-based solutions, which is why we have our 60-year license for our ecosystem restoration project, which is the Riau Ecosystem Restoration Program. And of course, as a final point, you cannot talk about carbon emissions reduction in Indonesia without addressing the issue of fire and haze. And this is where the point about engaging the local communities come in. It's about recognizing their rights to have sustainable livelihood and to development. And the way to do that is that by building their capacity and then providing them alternative means to clear the land for agricultural purposes so that they do not resort to burning. So that is how we approach our climate ambitions, which is really about having that holistic approach and ensuring that we recognize the interdependencies and the need to integrate all imperatives.
Yeah. Fantastic. And what a wonderfully nuanced and multifaceted view at this. You can't look at this as a blunt instrument saying 50% reduction at all costs. Of course, there needs to be a goal, but I like the way you sort of not looking at this in isolation and the holistic approach. So thank you for sharing. It's really inspirational. Khim, maybe coming back to you. Companies often say that people are their greatest assets. And thinking about the topics covered earlier today in the spirit of stewardship, steward leadership, etc., how important are people issues and human capital levers when you're driving your sustainability priorities?
Right. I think in Unilever, sustainability has always been in the heart of the company, and therefore it actually forms the culture of the company. I think 90% of our employees in our survey say that they're proud to work for Unilever, and out of that, like 79% of the employees actually say that it's actually driven by sustainability, the heart of sustainability in the company. So I really believe that it's the people that is the driving force behind sustainability efforts of the company. At Lifebuoy, for example, we also have a team that obviously focus on the social mission work that we do, but in the broader space of the team, everybody believes that whatever we do on a day-to-day, whether it's the communication that we put out or the products that we produce or even innovations that we put into the market, these are all efforts to actually impact hygiene and the better health of consumers across the markets that we serve. So let me give you an example, like why we believe that human capital is the driving force behind sustainability. So during COVID, basically everybody got hygiene education, right? Everybody remembered to wash their hands and got educated on the hygiene message. But post-COVID, the implication is also that people are very tired of this message already. Like they don't want to hear anything about hygiene. They don't want you to say you need to wash your hands. It's common knowledge. However, we've also noticed that behavior has fallen. So even though knowledge is there, people have forgotten to keep hygiene habits. And therefore, it is the people behind the team that constantly evolve our strategies and our campaigns and see how we actually stay relevant and ensure that our message goes out to consumers in a more engaging and efficient manner. And therefore, like this year, for example, we decided to, we created a campaign which is actually teaching hygiene habits through play, having fun. We actually hacked games like, tic-tac-toe, changed them into germs-tac-toe, snakes and leather, changed it to germs and leather, and use the concept of fun and gaming with kids so that they actually get to learn all these hygiene habits in a more engaging, memorable, unmissable manner, so that they remember this hygiene habit. So, and all these are actually just done by people who know the consumers and know how to push the boundaries to create, better solutions to the problems that we have on hand.
What a beautiful example. Germs and ladders, something that I'm sure will resonate particularly with the younger audience. But you're touching on something that's really germane here, which is, no pun intended, so, which is, we did a piece of work with a Fortune 50 company in the US about what is the role of the HR function or the people function to drive the sustainability agenda. And one of those themes was these behavioral nudges, right? Because the storytelling and the narrative gets old after a while, and you do need these continuous nudges. And so this is a really good example of that. So thank you. Sandra, maybe coming to back to Faber-Castell story. As you mentioned earlier, you've set fairly stretched carbon emission reduction plans with the intent to reduce your footprint by 55% by 2030. How do you ensure that the board is equipped to provide the oversight on your climate strategy? but also that management has the necessary skills, capabilities, and importantly, leadership attributes.
Okay, let me briefly explain to you our strategy,
Please.
which has been implemented in the year 2020. Actually, the corporate strategy is visualized in a tree. So this tree consists of the trunk, the branches, and the leaves, and they stand for or reflect our global supply chain, our distribution, our business units, our processes and systems. The roots, they are our people, our strong brand, and on the other hand, our sustainable commitment. And this sustainable commitment has ever been there. Our company is more than 260 years old. Now, what is important about the strategy is it has not been imposed on the people or on the teams. It has been created, developed, and rolled out with global experts, more than 80 people. I'm proud that also our regional head, Mr. Harlem, is here, who was one of the driving forces to put in place this really, let's say, interactive and common team together. So all these, let's say, 80 experts, they have worked together and come up with the KPIs, which are global KPIs for the different pillars of our big tree. And they are cascaded down on the country level, so customized on the local, let's say, the local capabilities and needs. And this is how we ensure that the whole company embraces this strategy and sustainability strategy. Now, coming to the leadership skills, along with the global corporate strategy, you have to have a corporate cultural transformation as well. So what we have done since 2020 is to set up corporate essentials. So the mission, the vision, and the values of our company, have rolled them out through the whole Faber-Castell group, and also together with the corporate essentials, the leadership essentials, like resilience, entrepreneurial thinking, authenticity, being inspiring and developing people. So that is how we make sure that sustainability strategy is sustainable.
Very well said. And at the risk of sounding that I'm plugging Stewardship Asia Center, but Rajiv is a big proponent of this, about the difference between stewardship and steward leadership as a mindset, which touches on a lot of the themes that you spoke about. So thank you for sharing that. Lucita, just coming back to this notion of, I guess a lot of the sustainability related media currently represents Western views and Western sensibilities. You mentioned earlier sort of needing to focus on Indonesia and this part of the world. But building on the theme for today's panel, which is leading a sustainable future in Asia, what has been your experience in this part of the world? And also, as a company with strong presence in emerging economies like Indonesia, how do you balance environmental, social, and commercial priorities?
Thanks, Shai. I think that's an interesting point. As a company operating in a developing economy, we do face this ongoing challenge of having to clarify perceptions or address the narratives that have been largely framed by the Western perspective. Our industry has been cast in a dichotomy where production and conservation cannot be done in the same landscape, for example, right? I remember a time when one of our stakeholders actually came to me and asked, when did plantation forestry, particularly in Indonesia, become the new oil? No disrespect to colleagues who are coming from that sector. But that gives you a sense of the kind of scrutiny that our industry has faced in the last few years. Now, so the challenge for us, of course, was then, how do we come up with a business model that demonstrates that we can actually do production and protection, and at the same time deliver on the socioeconomic benefits that are still needed in a developing economy. And this is how our production protection model has evolved, which is really basically looking at the landscape and finding a way to balance our production requirements with also conservation and protection and of forests and other natural resources, while at the same time still enabling the local communities to achieve and to respond to their right to development. Of course, it's also a challenge to start adopting global frameworks, particularly to the unique economic and social cultural considerations of a developing economy. We need to address or to respond to the local needs, but at the same time also be seen or as responding to global standards or aligning with global standards. So those are very intricate nuancing or balancing that we have to do as an organization. On the second part of your question about balancing all these imperatives, I think when you're operating in a developing economy, we need to acknowledge that sustainability and development are two sides of the same coin. We spoke earlier about our climate commitments, but we do have commitments as well to eliminate extreme poverty up to 50 kilometers from our mill site. We have a target for zero net loss for conservation, and also we have a target for reducing the incidence of stunting by up to 50% among children in the province of Riau. And we have a target for improving the share of renewable energy, and at the same time, we also have a target for increasing the percentage of women in management in our organization. So there is such a pillar, because without a recognition of the people part of this, I think whatever we do on the climate and nature part will not necessarily reach its full potential. Again, it's going back to that same point about having an integrated approach and recognizing all the imperatives at the same time.
How wonderfully said. And again, without the people sort of force, you can't actually make the meaningful change, and change doesn't sort of last. And certainly you need to start with changing behaviors and changing culture for some of these programs to get embedded. Thank you for sharing that. We have about 15, 16 minutes left, and I did want to just point at this point. There is a pigeonhole, so please feel free to ask questions. We will have some time for audience Q&A. And while sort of the audience is getting warmed up with some complex questions, maybe I can come back to you, Khim. Unilever has a very powerful purpose statement, which is making sustainable living commonplace. Can you please share more about the company's interventions within rural communities in Asia or South Asia? And how do you assess the social impact that programs such as Project Shakti or Lifebuoy's hand washing campaign can have on the society?
Right. I think, of course, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of it is all about impact and skill. We really believe in doing our sustainable efforts, making an impact to a large number of communities. And therefore, there is a lot of partnership involved, basically with partnership with NGO and government. That's how we sort of spread our impact, especially deep down into rural communities. But more recently, for example, like I said, like Lifebuoy is a brand that's not really just a brand, right? It's a commitment, and it's a commitment to drive hygiene habits and protection of health. And therefore, we have actually expanded Lifebuoy beyond just providing a product. We are now actually offering telehealth services with partnerships of telehealth companies. And why do we do that? Because in many of these underserved communities in places where Lifebuoy exists, where WHO's recommendation is about 1 to 1,000 doctors, the reality is that it's probably closer to 1 to 10,000. And many of these rural underserved communities lacks access to these health services. So because of our access as Lifebuoy, because we are into so many families, and we have the impact of communicating to so many families, including the rural communities, we actually use this muscle to actually provide this health services and expert advice to these underserved communities through partnerships with telehealth companies. We also have chatbots, health chatbots that we call Mobile Doctorni in India, where actually, for consumers in these communities, if they have health issues, they have no one to turn to. They often turn to their relatives and get uninformed information. And this is an avenue for them to actually seek proper sort of expert advice. And this is how we believe that through partnerships and through the evolution of the way we create this brand, or we actually land this brand in these markets, is how we are able to actually make an impact into rural communities.
Fantastic. And your impact in rural communities, both on the social aspects, the health aspects, but also the commercial aspects are really inspirational.
Yeah.
For those of you who haven't had a chance to even look at or not familiar with Project Shakti, an initiative that Unilever ran. I would encourage you to strongly Google that, because that was a really good example of balancing commercial and social good. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Sandra, maybe changing gears slightly and thinking about innovation and creativity. And Faber-Castell, you have a very compelling vision, which is to be the leading force to unleash the creative potential of humanity. What role does creativity and innovation play in the sustainability agenda? And how can we harness that to future-proof our companies for future generations?
So maybe to start with an anecdote, one of the most frequently asked questions in media interviews is, why do you still produce pencils in the digital era? And just to tell you that we have just recorded the second most successful year in the company's history of 260 years. So apparently there is still a need for pens and pencils. And why is this? Because creativity is one of the most important skills, professional skills in our future. That is also what the future study of job, the future study of job from the World Economic Forum is saying. So the creative thinking is what is going to be one of the most important skills. And it's probably also something that will differentiate us from artificial intelligence. Well, we can discuss that, if artificial intelligence can be creative or not. I doubt it will be on the short run. So creativity is important, and it is also important for our children. The fine motor, to train the fine motoric skills through writing, drawing, crafting, is something that develops the children's brain, so they make them smarter and intelligent. And that's where innovation comes in. And I think it is needed to really, creative thinking is the most important asset to become innovative. And we believe as a company that change needs creativity. And that holds true for sustainability and the saving of our planet. So we will definitely have a future as well as a company.
Very well said. I'm sure there will be some questions, if not now, then later on in the break, to ask you for examples of how creativity has linked to your sustainability agenda. But perhaps, Lucita, coming to you, and we heard this earlier from Vinika, that we're moving from VUCA to Barney world. One of my favorite expressions, by the way, Barney being brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. I think we all can identify with the incomprehensible part. You just have to open the newspaper and sort of try to make sense of what's going on. But the difference between VUCA and Barney, which is the former reflects the need for adaptability and flexibility, whereas the latter emphasizes the need for resilience and reinvention. So in this new reality, what role does steward leadership play in ensuring the resilience of businesses and business models?
Interesting. I think the first thing is not to be daunted by all the acronyms, right?
True.
To even make sense of the acronyms I guess, it's a challenge in itself. But isn't this where steward leadership really come in? Where the strength of what steward leadership is all about really come in? It's about really being anchored on purpose and values, right? And it's about being true to your purpose regardless of the shocks, the turbulence, the upheavals that happen in your external environment. And I think steward leadership is also about having that long-term view. Because, of course, you need to respond to the short-term challenges, but you need to make sure as well, or businesses need to make sure that we're not compromising on our long-term commitments. We may be pacing back a bit, we may be reducing scale, but it doesn't mean that you're losing sight of what you really set out to do over the long term. And what this means is basically really being willing or taking the risks to invest even in untested solutions, for example, right? Because one can never wait for a perfect environment or for all the right enabling conditions to be in place or for global consensus to happen, just to have that imperative to act. Where global consensus is right now is really that there's urgency for decisive action. And that is, I think, what steward leadership could really propel at this point. I remember, I think it's been 30 years since we all adopted the triple bottom line approach of profit, people, planet. But there is a question being posed these days where are we actually all reverting back to singular materiality again, where everything is being translated in terms of financial benefits? I mean, you mentioned in your introduction that, you know, we're at a point where we're supposed to move past moral imperative because we need to prove financial impact. But I think what steward, for me at least, what steward leadership really is all about is it's about the moral imperative. It's about having that willingness to act and address an issue just because it's the right thing to do for the collective good. So that would be
What
my
lovely
contribution.
counsel for everybody. And like with all things in life, it's about getting the balance, right? Balance again between commercial priorities and the moral imperative. But thank you. That's really good counsel for everybody. We have a few questions coming from the chat. So if you don't mind, I'll read those. And anybody, please feel free to jump in. And if nobody does, then I might just reach out to one of you. So the first question is, how do you distinguish true purpose and purpose washing?
There's another term, yes. Maybe I begin?
Go ahead.
Okay. The true test is, of course, in the delivery. You need to show action. You need to demonstrate action. And then, of course, it was mentioned earlier that it's not just return on investment, but return on profit and impact, right? It's also about being able to show impact. I think in our case, for example, we do have a policy against no deforestation. The way we do this is, of course, there's external assurance. A year-on-year basis, there's sustainability reporting that's independently assured to show that we are actually delivering on what we do. The second test is really about accountability. You know, being able to show to your stakeholders that it's not just, it's the business strategy that's aligned with the external stakeholder requirements, right? So everybody can talk about this is our purpose, but if you're not able to deliver on the ground where it matters, and where you're not able to impact also the immediate stakeholders, which are the local communities and the employees and the workers within your sphere of influence, then a lot of this is really just lofty words.
Indeed. Well, in the inimitable words of Elvis Presley, little less conversation, little more action, right? So it is more action rather than the conversation about purpose washing. But Khim, Sandra, either of you want to jump in?
I can add. I think it also depends on how you define, at least from my perspective as a brand, how do you define purpose for a brand? I think if your purpose, the purpose of the brand and what the brand stands for, the DNA of the brand is actually closely integrated and it's not at the fringe or something you do, you know, sort of at a side. Then it becomes something that, you know, you do every day. So everything that you do from, you know, every P that we mentioned about or every activity that we do, it's so closely integrated that, you know, you can't be doing something purpose washing. Like everything you do is purposeful. I think that's how you defined it. Like
everything you do is purposeful. Good counsel. All right, so the next question we had was around corporate. So I'll read out the question and then perhaps Sandra, if you want to just jump in on this. Corporate planning cycles are built upon driving measurable KPIs. How do you ensure the less measurable but equally important sustainability objectives are prioritized when trade-offs need to be made?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, first of all, what has to be said is that sustainability is part of our strategy. So it is actually part of our KPIs that we measure. And this is top down. So it means that the family, let's say the shareholders, make sure that sustainability and sustainability development is actually part of, let's say, the performance indicators. And so that's one thing. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, we do have KPIs which we measure. And of course, there are trade-offs. Talking about renewable plastics, for the company is switching from virgin plastics towards renewable plastics, but all types of recycled materials, whether it comes to products and whether it comes to packaging. So there is a constant move towards this. And this is, of course, where we have to see there is a higher cost that is that comes with it. So it's both Maybe we need to be more efficient in our ways of manufacturing. On the other hand, might come with a higher price tag. So we have to educate our consumers as well as far as sustainability production is concerned. So that's how we deal with it.
Thank you, Sandra. Lucita, you mentioned KPIs as well. So I think would love to hear your perspective on this, because it's a great way of translating strategy into action, right?
We do not differentiate sustainability from the business KPIs.
Right.
I think that's the very first thing. And the other way of doing it is really building it into the business model, right? So an example that I can give to illustrate this is one of the targets, one of the commitments that we adopted during our April 2030 launch is we adopted a self-tariff for conservation. So that for every ton of fiber supply that goes to the mill, there's $1 that's actually invested in conservation. So regardless of market cycles, whether the fiber supply increases or decreases, there is a set budget for conservation. So we are able to protect that really from market cycles such as these, and where trade-offs need to be managed. The other thing is really about having metrics that I made a point about financial impact earlier, but actually, yes, there are ways to make a business case out of sustainability. We have a sustainability linked loan, and one of the KPIs is about, of course, some of our sustainability targets. Yeah. And whether we meet the KPI or not affects the performance of our sustainability linked loans in terms of interest rates. So there are ways that not just in terms of KPIs, but in terms of business metrics, where you can actually build in sustainability so that it's not seen as ancillary to the business, but it's actually integrated into the model.
That is a wonderful theme, and we will come back to that, I'm pretty sure, even in the last 3 minutes or so we've left. But I want to come to Khim with a similar question as well, because Unilever, you've probably, at Lifebuoy by extension, been exemplars about setting very measurable goals when it comes to sustainability. I think one of the first things I did in 2016, 2017, when I started on this journey, is go to your website and look at the Excel sheet that you have with all the different sustainability-related KPIs. This old adage, what gets measured gets done. So do you want to share the Unilever experience?
I think, again, it's all about the integration to the core of the business. I think a lot of sustainability measures and objectives that we want to meet are all incorporated into what we do on a day-to-day to brand, and the impact that it brings back to the brand. So, for example, Lifebuoy, if you ask, when do you do sort of social mission if profits come at stake? But the model that is built is a cyclical one, because the more we actually teach hygiene habits, what happens? Like soap consumption goes up because people wash their hands more often. And when soap consumption goes up, they have to buy more soap. And which brand would they buy? They would buy the brand that comes, sort of first to their mind, because we have been speaking to them and we have been connecting with them. And therefore, I think it brings about that, cyclical business model that enables us to sustain the impact that we make.
Very good. Thank you. We could continue speaking for hours, but I want to be respectful for the next session and the rest of the agenda. So one final question to all of you. And in a maximum of 5 words, or let's say one line, we'll give some leeway. What advice or final takeaway do you want to leave the participants with today? So in one line, maybe we'll start with you, Khim.
I think I would say that sustainability stewardship, it's probably a creative journey rather than a sprint, something that you sort of do long-term, integrated into the core of your brand, and that's how you get success.
Very good. Thank you. Lucita?
I'm so tempted to just say, keep calm and carry on, 5 words. But what I really want to share with the audience right now, in the case of sustainability amidst turbulent times, complexity does not mean impossible.
Very nice. I mean, both wonderful counsel, keep calm and carry on, but complexity does not mean impossible. I appreciate that. Thank you. Sandra?
So maybe 2 things. One is not just have a vision, but really have values that you live on a day-to-day basis. And second, change needs creativity.
Change needs creativity. Well said. I'm going to use a little bit of moderator privilege and share my own one line, if you don't mind. I'm a bit of a movie buff, and one of my favorite movies is The Godfather. And there's a scene in The Godfather where Michael Corleone says, "It's not personal, it's strictly business." And that's how we have to think about sustainability. Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, please join me in thanking our panelists for a wonderful conversation. Thank you for your insights.